Well, I grew up in Minnesota, which of course has a strong choral tradition, but I myself did not start singing in choir until I was a senior in high school. I played in the band, I played trumpet, and I was involved in athletics. In my small town, it was possible to be involved in most everything at the high school. And in my senior year, I sang. We had a wonderful conductor. I, at that point, had wished that I had begun earlier. And then I went to St. Olaf College. Now, of course, that's a famous place for choral music, but I went there planning to be a business major, and I was going to play football. But the summer before my freshman year, I hurt my knee, and I decided to not try out that fall. And of course, I had had a good experience in choir in high school, so I thought, well, let me give this choir another try. And of course, at St. Olaf, it was amazing. And I got in the highest choir you could as a freshman. It kind of rocked my world. And then I tried out for the famous St. Olaf choir that goes on tour at the end of my freshman year, and making the decision that if I got in, I would do that, and if I didn't, I'd try and get ready for football in my sophomore year. So I did get in, and then eventually I became a music major, a composition major, in fact. But as the years went on, I got more and more interested in singing. Then I went to the Eastman School of Music to pursue vocal performance. And while I was there, they reinvigorated their choral conducting program, which had been dormant for a while. So I, in fact, did degrees in both those areas at Eastman. And then I got spun out into the real world, and I taught voice, and I taught theory, and I taught choir, and at a little place in Mississippi. And then I came, as I say, temporarily to the University of New Mexico in 1985. So this has become home. I didn't think so 30 years ago, but this is the end of my 30th year now on the faculty of the University of New Mexico, where I am the director of choral activities. So that's it in a nutshell. Well, as I mentioned before, I went to St. Olaf College, and that has a really strong history of the conductors also being composers. The founder of the choir was F. Melius Christiansen, and that's more than 100 years ago. And in those days, there was not much choral music of quality being put out by anyone in the United States. It was all sort of glee club, bird in a gilded cage kind of thing. And so he started to write music for his choir to use, and his son Olaf, in fact he had two sons, Olaf and Paul, both wrote music for their choirs. My professor at St. Olaf was Kenneth Jennings. He was a fine composer, and I also studied piano with Carolyn Jennings, Dr. and Mrs. Jennings, our husband and wife, and she also is a fine composer. So when I went out into my first job, which was in this little junior college in Mississippi, I had the idea that if something didn't exist that you needed for your choir, you might do it yourself. And my first choir was small and not awfully skilled, and I wanted to have an arrangement of Away in a Manger that would suit them. And as a matter of fact, there are 2 or 3 common tunes to Away in a Manger sung in England and Germany and the United States. And I couldn't pick between my 2 favorite, and so I made an arrangement that went back and forth between them by stanza. And it occurred to me that if I needed that for my little group, maybe somebody else would. And that piece was published and sold a lot of copies right away. And so I was lucky. My first piece is still in print 30-some years later, and still sells copies every year. And so shortly after that, I joined ASCAP. And if I could back up a step, I would say that it's a little bit of a fancy term, but if you'd allow me, the great Paul Hindemith, the German composer, would talk about music for use, Gebrauchsmusik. And so that especially originally was my ideal, that I'm going to now tailor-make an arrangement for the choir that I'm in charge of. And then as I got more skilled in this, and the choirs that I was in charge of were more skilled, my arrangements became a little more complex, or I was hired, commissioned to write for, say, a church's 100th anniversary or the retirement of a beloved high school choir director, that kind of thing. Or I started to tailor-make music for my own choirs. And so at this point, I've been publishing music for a little over 30 years and have been a member of ASCAP for about 20. Well, in regard to how ASCAP has helped me as a composer, I would say maybe I came to the dance a little bit late. I had already been composing and arranging for a while when I joined ASCAP, but of course what I started to think about and consider with regard to them was their reach and who was using my music. So in my annual royalty statements, I would see if it had been on the radio or done by colleges and universities. In the realm of classical music, you tend to get an estimation. I'm sure everybody gets an estimation, but I think it is more of a, it isn't like a big radio station that's playing music by Sting or Elton John all the time and counting every single time. So with regard to tailoring some of my intent towards things that people seem to like, it was a two-edged sword. I mean, I do consider myself something of an artist, and so I need to write things that I think speak to that which I might call my inner muse or my aesthetic. But, you know, if lots of other people like it, that's not all bad. So I go back to this Gebrauchsmusik, this idea that, well, really, I'm trying to talk to people that are alive today. I have no delusions of grandeur that 100 or 500 years from now, they'll still be doing my music. If they are, that's great. I won't be here. But while I am here, hopefully somebody gets some enjoyment out of it. And looking at my ASCAP royalty statement shows me a little bit about what people are seeming to pick up from my 140 pieces that are out there in the published world. Well, in regard to advice that I might give to younger composers, both in regard to being a member of ASCAP or just, you know, composing especially for the voice, I would say that it comes up fairly often now in my life here at the university. That is, recently my university colleagues who are on the composition faculty have added me to be somebody with whom young students could study composition, and they come to me especially if they're interested in singing. Now, we might say that every instrument should sing, quote unquote. I certainly feel that way and have a sort of a lyrical bent. But oftentimes, and I have to tread carefully here, but oftentimes the people that are doing the cutting edge in composition are trying to invent totally new sounds. And what this can end up being oftentimes is pretty disjunct melodies. This is difficult for singers. It's not impossible, but essentially what I'm saying is on a scale of 1 to 10, if everything's going to be a 10 in difficulty, being the most difficult, you're really going to limit yourself to how many people could sing it insofar as how many people actually have the technique to sing at that virtuosic level all of the time. I'm going to digress for a minute and say I'm a member of the American Choral Directors Association. I think we have 18 or 20,000 members. Choirs are everywhere. When you think about it, there's a choir in most every church, elementary schools oftentimes, usually middle schools and high schools, pretty much every college and university. There are avocational choirs, there are evening choirs for people who just like to sing, and of course there are professional choirs. And so it's a little bit like knowing your audience. Sometimes I'll talk to my composition students and say, it's like you're going to write an article or a chapter in a book. Who do you expect to read this? Is this an article for People magazine? Is this an article for the Wall Street Journal? Is this an article for Time? Is this an article in a scholarly paper? Is this a chapter in a PhD dissertation? And if it's a PhD dissertation, then we're talking about experts understanding what you're talking about. If it's for People magazine, that's a different readership. And if I can bring this metaphor back home, I'd say that what tends to happen with younger composers is they're writing at a level that, if we were going to compare it to an article, might be read by somebody in high school. And then all of a sudden there are 4 words in a row that only a PhD specialist in nuclear physics would understand. And then we go back to 11th grade level, and then it's a 12th grade level, and then it's a PhD level, and then it's a 4th grade level. So they're not consistent in their rhetoric from one end to the other. And that, more than anything else, will make a singer stumble. Namely, if I know everything's going to be at a PhD level, then I'm ready for it. If everything's going to be at a high school level, I'm ready for it. If it jumps back and forth, I don't know what to expect, and I'm probably going to stumble. So my advice to young composers would be attend some of these ASCAP seminars. They are much more prevalent now than when I was a young composer, and they give wonderful advice, and you get to talk to people that are writing at the highest level. But then also just don't be afraid to make a decision in advance of which choir is going to sing this, not some mythical choir that if only everyone understood the great genius that you are, they would flock to your music, but rather say, now I'm going to go to this church choir that I admire in my community. I'm going to say, can I write a piece for you, and see what it sounds like. I'm going to now go to the local university and ask, can I write a piece for you? And then don't get upset if they come back to you and have practical suggestions about what makes it better, especially if choral music is not your normal, forte. If you were trained as a percussionist or a pianist, it's a lot different to do disjunct melodies on a marimba or a piano than to do it in your voice. One other thought I'd give you, Morton Lordson, who is perhaps the most performed composer alive today, certainly alive in America today, sings every one of his melodic lines. So he will sing in his own range, the soprano, obviously, the alto, the tenor, the bass. If there are multiple parts and you have to jump around, can he do it himself? And he's not trained as a singer, but his point is, if I can't sing it and I wrote it, then it may be an illogical jump. I'm putting a little bit of words in his mouth, but he makes sure that all of his lines are vocal, and that's why us vocalists flock to his music. Copyright law is a complicated issue, and if you are at all in a gray area, my first piece of advice would be make sure that you are not deciding in a vacuum all by yourself what you think would be fair, because that might not be the law. That being said, copyright law has changed. No, let me back up. That being said, I'm not an expert either. I have had a lot of experience with it. I have about 140 pieces in print. I oversee 2 different lines of choral music for the Neil H. Ost Music Company. I've published with, I don't know exactly, 8 or 10 different publishing houses. I've been doing this for 35 years, and I'm no expert. So that being said, copyright law in this country has changed a couple of times, probably more than that, but it's changed a couple of times in the 20th and 21st century. The point, of course, is that it is meant to protect intellectual property, so that if you have a great idea and you write it down, as a matter of fact, if you have a great idea and you write it down, theoretically it's copyrighted immediately, if you can prove that that's your idea and you wrote it down first. Then there's the formal business of getting copyright registered with the United States government. Now, I myself am not a great expert on that, insofar as all of my pieces that are published with traditional publishing houses that have existed for a long time. And so I send them my music and I say, hey, would you like to publish this? And if they say yes, then they make a contract and they own the piece and I get royalties. And so they have to register with the Copyright Office. Obviously, nowadays there's a changing paradigm of people doing self-publishing and making their own websites and having a pay platform like PayPal or something like that. This, I think you would want to tread carefully if you're new to it, especially if you're using anything, any material that anybody else had anything to do with in the past. So, for example, and maybe this is off the beaten track a little bit, but let's say you pick up a copy printed by G. Schirmer, a famous old company, of a Mozart opera. And you think, well, Mozart's been dead for a really long time, and Da Ponte, his librettist, has been dead almost as long. This must be in the public domain. Yes, but maybe there's an English translation that's copyrightable. And the plates themselves had to be organized by a company, and they should get some money for that. So in this era of digital phones and iPads and easy Xeroxing and so forth, you have to watch out that you're not grabbing hold of something that somebody owns. If you are making an arrangement of Silent Night, well, of course, it was in German first, Stille Nacht, and that's in the public domain. But what about the English translation? It might have been made in 1850, but it might have been made in, maybe somebody made a new one that you particularly like in 1990. Those words then are copyrighted. And if you want your material protected, then we should protect the material of a brother or sister artist. So that is the issue, and the most complicated issue is when does something come into public domain, and that is a moving target based on when it was copyrighted, especially in the 20th and 21st century, because the rules changed. That being said, Europe has different copyright laws than America. Asia has different copyright laws, and there are a lot of places where people just plain don't observe them. In this country, we can say we don't observe them every time we Xerox something that is under copyright, and that happens more than it should. But at least we have the sense that we probably shouldn't do it. There are other places that are either don't have that law at all or are just plain, you know, they are pirates. And so they will knock off DVDs of famous movies and CDs of somebody's music and box them up and sell them. And so it's a big problem. Policing it is a big problem with the web now, Spotify, and these kinds of streaming things. It is, look, I'm in my 50s and I can probably keep doing what I want to do until I don't want to do it anymore, and I got on board in the traditional times. But if I was starting off now as a 25 or 30-year-old, it's really a moving landscape. So in essence, I would say if you are making any kind of an arrangement or using any text, maybe a poem that you read in the New Yorker or that you were fond of, you want to make sure that it is available. Technically, as I understand it, let's say a poem by Robert Frost, you know, the great Robert Frost, they are still under copyright, and if I decide to make a setting of that for choir, and then after the fact go and ask the estate of Robert Frost if I could set that poem to music, I've already broken the law. I should have asked before I put pencil to paper or cursor to computer screen. And if they're not going to send the police after me because they wouldn't make any money at it, but they could. You should ask first and see if you get permission, and they'll probably say yes, and then you might say, okay, now I've set it to music. Now I'd like to see about getting it published, or I'd like to publish it myself. And then you have to make a contract so that people get a fair share of their intellectual property. Long story come to an end, it is really hard to police, but you want to be one of the good guys. You don't want to see what you can get away with, because if you actually realize your wildest dreams and start making some decent money, they will follow the money. If you are not succeeding, you'll probably get away with it. But you want to succeed, right? They'll find you. So do the right thing. Well, as I mentioned earlier, I started my career maybe 35 years ago when I'm not sure they were still literally engraving plates, but the technology was older. And as a matter of fact, I don't know how to do finale or Sibelius. I'm not sure I should admit this in a public venue, but I've got sort of a grandfather's clause that I can just send it in and they'll figure it out. They have somebody. Sometimes I'll get one of my students to do that and pay them something, and they seem to be happy for the money, and I'm glad I didn't have to spend 300 hours learning how finale works. But basically, I developed a relationship in the middle and late 1980s when I started to write music, especially that was geared towards the kind of choirs that I had then, which were church choirs or four-part mixed choirs that weren't awfully skilled, but loved to sing. And one of the things I'd say, by the way, is I think we have to be careful that we don't think that because somebody doesn't have musical skill that they are somehow simple. I mean, wisdom came when I was 27 or 30 or something like that, and I figured, all these people in this choir, they can't sing nearly as well as I do. They don't know any fancy Italian words for musical ideas. But this person's a doctor, this person's a lawyer, this person is an accountant, this person runs a small company, this person was in the military. I mean, all these people know all kinds of things that I don't know. So as long as I can talk to them in a way that treats them as intelligent adults, then I can explain music along those lines. And my point being that perhaps the notes and rhythms are simple, but the texts can be rather more complex, I think, than sometimes we think, that if it's a complex text, it has to be a terribly complex music. So I started setting pretty substantial texts to music that wasn't all that hard. And this found a market with people that wanted to be treated like they understood. They had been around the block a couple of times, so to speak, in life. And that being said, when I sent it into various publishers, they said, yes, I think we can sell this because this seems like something that our people, our normal customers would like. And that brings me to the idea of the normal customer, quote unquote, for each publishing house. If we're talking about traditional choral music publishing, and that's moving all the time too because the paradigm is changing so quickly, but you would not look at this house for that kind of music or that house for this kind of music. So for example, let's say that you wrote what for church choir might be considered a high Episcopalian piece, an Anglican, English, Vaughan Williams kind of piece. You probably shouldn't send it to a publisher that specializes in gospel music. I mean, even if they publish it, their usual customer doesn't go to them for that kind of music. It's like if you are looking for, if you're starting a new line of pickup truck, you shouldn't try and market it through the people that sell sports cars. Nobody's going to come on that lot looking for a pickup truck. They came to that lot looking for a sports car. So there has to be some knowledge of what the profile of each publisher is, and then you have to be prepared to wait. This is one of the hardest things, and when you're young, you're impatient. Let me tell you, when you're older, you're impatient too, but at least you maybe learned a couple of things. And you say, well, they sat on it for a year, and then they sent it back and said, we don't want it. And people are so frustrated, and I go, yeah, that's how it goes. I mean, after a year, that's bad manners on their part. But anywhere from 3 months to 12 months is the process by which traditional publishers choose and publish a new line of music. So, for example, if you wrote this sports car of a piece and you sent it to people that publish pickup trucks, if I can use that metaphor, and then they sit on it for a year, and then they're going to send it back and say, yeah, we don't publish this kind of music. And so you've wasted a whole year right there. You need to know who's going to give your best shot. Now, I could elaborate more along those lines, but I think you get the idea. And then I would bring up the new changing world that we are living in. And somebody says, well, why should I publish with a traditional publisher at all? Why don't I just do it myself? Because, not me, but this person who's speaking now, I put it on Finale and it's all set to go, and let her rip. That has worked through the years, especially with certain kinds of people. Leonard Bernstein set up his own publishing house. Stephen Paulus set up his own publishing house. They had created a profile as a composer that people just said, I need a new piece by Stephen Paulus, so I'm going to get it from Stephen Paulus. Until you reach that, that is a tough thing to do. And of course, Leonard Bernstein died, I don't know, 25 years ago or more. So he set up a traditional publishing house. And I guess so did Steve Paulus. Nowadays, people, young students here at the university and all over the country and the world are making a nice website. I think this is great. And they put their music on there and they have a sample and so forth. As a person who is a longtime choir director and pretty busy in that role, I will tell you there are two problems. They're not insurmountable problems, but there are two issues. For one, there has been no vetting process. Pretty much everything that this new person puts on there is just, on there. Whereas if it gets published by Oxford University Press, a bunch of really smart people decided this would fit into the Oxford University Press profile. That's not to say that somebody, Stephen Paulus was very highly regarded, and pretty much everything he put on there was wonderful because he was a master composer. Until somebody reaches that status, for me to kind of sort through a bunch of different music by a 25 or 30-year-old, whatever age, new composer, that's pretty time intensive on my half. So what ends up being the issue is that I can't find all of these individuals that are publishing all over the web, and then when I do, there hasn't been any particular screening process. Now there are sort of in-between things, like there's a company called Graphite Publishing. Abby Bettinas, a wonderful composer up in the Twin Cities, has a Composers Coalition. I can't think of the name of that right now. So there has been a sort of a coming together of the new and old. There is a screening process, but then the publishing platform is done on the web. Last thing I would say, and these are just the random thoughts of a guy who's done this for 35 years, is there's a lot to be said for the heavy paper and the high quality of something that went through an offset printing process, as opposed to the typical photocopy paper and the 3 staples on the side, which is pretty noisy in a concert. So it's changing. It would be great if everybody had, on the other end of the consumer end, the ability to buy from the producer some new thing that they found out somehow, and then make just as nice a product when we decide to go through PayPal and have that heavy paper and maybe some artwork on the cover and so forth and so on. But we'll see. Sometimes the best idea wins, sometimes it doesn't. This is the paradigm we are facing now. How do you get your message out to people if you're a new composer and not using a publishing house? If you are a publishing house, how do you compete with everybody publishing in their basement? There's a lot going on. I mean, the good news is there's more music than there ever was, but the bad news is there's more music than there ever was. And it's.
Can we do a pickup? There was a bit of static. Can we do a pickup from the good news and the bad news?
The good news is there's more music than there ever was.
Hold on, one more time, sorry, and action.
The good news is that there is more music than there ever was, but the bad news is there is more music than there ever has been, and it's just a lot to go through. Well, in regard to Philip Brunel and my relationship, we have known each other a long time. I think we first worked together in 1993, but he was playing the piano and I was singing, so neither of us were doing our usual thing, although maybe we were. He's a great pianist and organist, and I used to do a lot of singing. In any case, I was very, very pleased when Vocal Essence put the arrangement of Away in a Manger that I mentioned earlier on one of their Christmas discs. A simple piece, but sung elegantly by those wonderful singers and led by his marvelous musicianship. It was a real shot in the arm for me. He did not commission it, though. As I mentioned, that was the one that I had written years before that for my little group at my first job. I would say the most long-standing relationship with a professional chorus that I have had is with the Santa Fe Desert Chorale. That was started, I think, in 1983, and I moved to New Mexico in 1985, so I've been here for almost the whole time. And there have been, let's see, 1, 2, 3, 4 directors, all of whom I consider good friends, and all of whom have done my music. And the second, third, and fourth, I wrote, in some cases, more than one piece for those conductors. First there was Larry Banfield, who founded it, of course, and then Dennis Schrock, I wrote Dennis a piece, and Linda Mack, I wrote 2 for Linda, and now Josh Haberman, and I wrote one that Josh premiered a couple of years ago. So that has been an awful lot of fun, because that wonderful professional group then, if I can use a metaphor from a while back, I was writing PhD music, if you will, and they looked at it and said, yeah, you know, you want us to sing this now at sight? It was awfully fun. Those people are really terrifically talented and skilled. I think that vocal music is healthier in many ways than it has ever been, at least in the 30 or 40 years going back to my student days that I can look back on. There is just more, and that means that there are more, maybe more bad choirs, but there are more good choirs too. I remember somebody saying that when they went to an American Choral Directors Association convention 30, 40 years ago, the organization is a little over 50 years old, they would say, you know, we'd hear 10 choirs and 4 of them were amazing, and the other 6 were very, very good. Now you go and the level of amazingness, if that's a word, I don't think it is really tremendous. And I've gotten better at this, and I've got better ears, and I can hear better, and people are good. There are more choirs, I think, because of shows like Glee and Sing Off and all of that. There is a little bit of a sense, and maybe this has always been true, that, you know, I will do my thing and I will be outrageous in some way, and then I will suddenly become a famous and well-loved personality. I don't know, all those people that even who seem outrageous are pretty darn talented. Everybody who's working, by and large, is pretty good, or at least they are pretty polished. I'd say it's better. We hear stories about Frank Sinatra or Pavarotti or somebody else who couldn't read music. I'm not sure if it's true, but my advice is read music. Unless you're an immortal, it's better to just have the skills. When I joined the American Choral Directors Association, there were 3,000 members. Now I think there are 18 or 20,000 members. Our program here at the university has doubled. So popular programs have helped. All the music that's available has helped, various digital platforms, and being able to hear so many great things at the touch of a button or for paying 99 cents is just really amazing. That being said, I think I would close with a couple of thoughts. One is, all of that stuff that we hear at the touch of a button has been airbrushed, so to speak. Just like some famous model or movie star might be the best looking person that you ever saw in real life, but they don't look as good as they do on the magazine cover because somebody's played with that image. And so don't let the amazing things we are hearing keep you from actually doing it yourself. One of my analogies is on my desk, I have a beautiful photo of my beautiful wife. And it's a great reminder, and I look at it often during the course of the day, but it's not my wife. It's just a reminder of my wife. And a great performance is really not, in my book, music per se. It's a reminder of music. So make it for real. Get out there and keep singing. Vocal jazz, I love vocal jazz. The tuning, the listening to one another. I'm not a big fan, I have to say this, I'm not a big fan of show choirs when they run around a lot. Because being an old singer, it's hard on the vocal apparatus. And you're huffing and puffing and you're not supporting right. But standing there and singing in tight harmony with added seconds and sixths and ninths and elevenths and vocal improvisation and that kind of stuff, I think is great. Again, I'm kind of a purist. I just heard some great vocal jazz last week. Don't rely on the microphone to do the work for you. Do the work, then amplify it if you need to in a big room. But in my estimation, there's nothing more beautiful or more able to touch the hearts of the average audience member than the human voice. Not very many people can play the violin, but everybody's got a voice. So use it. Use it well, and actually sing to people, don't sing at them.